So a couple of weeks ago when I was here, I talked about having a sense of belonging. And I mentioned the work of religious historian Ken Wilbur, who wrote that religions have two primary focuses or functions in our lives. The first is to provide us with a sense of belonging through stories, traditions, rites of passage, rituals, guiding life principles. These are things that create a sense of belonging to a particular group. And then he says the second function of religion is to help us go beyond that, reach beyond that, beyond our ego, beyond our sense of separateness, to reach higher levels of consciousness, love, compassion, and even transformation. The first function fortifies the self, and the second function is what enables us to have a more robust sense of broad belonging, the recognition that everything and everyone is interconnected. And as I thought about this more after the service, I wondered why it is that so few of us are able to reach that second level, embrace that second function. James Fowler tells us that about 80% of the population stops their spiritual growth at that first stage of a more narrow sense of belonging. And I wondered, why is that we have such a difficult time reaching for that second function? And I thought, could there be an intermediate function or an intermediate step that would lead us to a broader sense of belonging and compassion? And I think there is. I think that many of us lack the kind of respect and compassion for ourselves that allows us then to grow a sense of compassion for others. So this is going to be my focus this morning, the practice of self-compassion that might serve as that bridge. In a recent blog post, the author Elizabeth Gilbert tells a story about a Tibetan Buddhist scholar by the name of Thupten Jinpa, who told her about how surprised he was when he first visited the modern capitalist Western world. He said on one hand, he noticed that the culture seemed to be one of great self-centeredness and individualism, where people were encouraged to do whatever they wanted to do, give themselves whatever they wanted. But on the other hand, he had never encountered people who had treated themselves with so much self-hatred, self-criticism, self-cruelty. And in fact, he said when he first started working with people in the Western world, he found that they were actually threatened by the idea of compassion toward themselves. The concept of self-friendliness seemed to actively threaten people. I think what the Buddhist scholar's observations demonstrate is that self-esteem, which our culture highlights and loves, and self-compassion, which seems to threaten us, are two very different mindsets. And while they've both been seen to be linked to psychological well-being, they diverge in very significant ways. High self-esteem requires standing out in the crowd, being special, being above average, like all those children in Lake Wobegon. Anybody remember that radio show? All the children are above average. The problem with this picture, of course, is it's impossible for everyone to be above average at the same time, right? While there may be some areas in which we excel, there will always be someone more attractive, more successful, more intelligent than we are, which can lead us to feel like failures when we are trying to compare ourselves to people who may be better than us. That elusive feeling of high self-esteem, that desire to see ourselves as better than average, is what often leads to some pretty nasty behavior. If I can be seen as the cool, tough kid in contrast to that wimpy nerd I just picked on, I get a self-esteem boost. If I believe that my ethnic, gender, national, or political group is better than yours, I get a self-esteem boost, which is Ken Wilber's first role in religion manifested, right? This is an aspect of the human condition that is so often used by people of influence and power to manipulate us. So this morning, I want to suggest that self-compassion is, in fact, the steady foundation from which all other compassion flows. A spiritual practice that can begin to soften the edges of the more negative elements of self-esteem. What exactly is self-compassion? It's really just a way of seeing ourselves without judgment, without evaluation. I like to say it's the way that God sees us. It's also treating ourselves as a dear friend might treat us. Many of the awful things we say to ourselves, we would never expect to hear from a friend, right? Unlike self-esteem, self-compassion is able to acknowledge that we are all imperfect. It doesn't desert us when things are bad. It's not contingent on how we look or how successful we are. And in essence, the practice of self-compassion includes three components, which I call self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Self-kindness, what do I mean by that? That simply means treating yourself as a friend would treat you. I want you to imagine for a moment that you have just picked up the phone to call a friend just to say hi, and you start the conversation with, "Hey, how are you doing?" And your friend says, "Terrible. I just got passed over for that promotion I'm sure was mine, but they gave it to somebody else, and I just am so devastated." Well, you say to your friend, to be perfectly honest, it's probably because you're too old, you're too boring, you're at least 20 pounds overweight, and frankly, you're probably seen as being pretty needy at work, because sometimes you can be that way in our friendship. Now, you're not going to hear that from a friend, right? But aren't these the kinds of things we tell ourselves all the time? So that first piece of self-compassion practice is learning to treat ourselves like a good friend would treat us, softly, encouragingly, maybe with a self-soothing hand on our heart, on our cheek. The second piece of this practice is what I call common humanity, where we remind ourselves that all humans are flawed. We are all works in progress. Everyone gets passed over. Everyone makes mistakes, trips on center stage. It recognizes that we are not isolated in those experiences. Instead, we are having a human experience. A human experience. And we are privileged to be a part of the human race. And third, mindfulness means that we allow all the thoughts and emotions that we are currently feeling to enter into our consciousness without trying to fix it. Being able to say, this sucks. This really hurts right now. You know, often in an effort to make that problem go away, we try to start fixing it, and that's when we get caught up in our beating ourselves up, because we try to think of all the reasons why we failed, why we allowed this to happen, instead of just what we are experiencing. And these three steps, they don't actually happen as in a stepwise fashion. Mindfulness, common humanity, self-kindness, they kind of ebb and flow. If you are doing like a 10-minute practice of this, you should feel all three of these happening at some point. And then it's always helpful to end the practice by saying, what is it I need right now? What can I give myself to comfort and support myself? It's important to ask not what can that person do for me, but what can I do for myself? And that's a beautiful way of ending this practice. Seems so easy, doesn't it? Simple. Self-compassion practice has been shown to have really positive benefits for our well-being. And yet, I have to be honest with you and say that I was so resistant to this when I had a spiritual director that first suggested this to me. She suggested, and I'm going to suggest this book to you, it's by Kristen Neff, and it's called see if I can remember, because I didn't write it down. I thought I'd remember. The Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. So if you want to take a deep dive into this topic, it's a great resource. I was so resistant to getting this book. I thought, well, isn't that just throwing a little pity party for myself? If I'm really compassionate with myself, won't it just make me lazy? And won't I just want to stay in bed and eat chocolate chip cookies all day? You know, the biggest reason for my resistance, though, was the fact that I really thought that self-criticism was the best way of motivating myself. And that if I wasn't motivating myself in that way, I wouldn't make progress like I could, right? I thought, well, that self-compassion business might be for other people, but it's not for me. But I bought the book because I'm a pretty good student, and I thought, well, at least I can use this when I'm working with other people, right? Turns out, the book starts by doing a little self-compassion assessment, and I scored very low. And I thought to myself, could that maybe be why I'm so judgy of other people? Why I'm not always as patient and understanding as I would like to be? It turns out that self-criticism, my friends, is not a great motivator. It tends to undermine your self-confidence, and when your self-confidence is undermined, that leads you to try to bolster your self-esteem, which leads to you being a pretty judgy person. Not such a good thing. And rather than self-compassion making you lazy, when you take the time to listen to your own heart, it can lead to a more fierce compassion for others that translates into action and service. When we put our own mask on first, we can more clearly see what's going on around us and understand the complex reasons why people do the kinds of things that they do. And self-compassion can also help us right-size our lives. I often hear people say that the world feels like such a huge dumpster fire that what they might be able or capable of doing to alleviate suffering seems so small. What is the point of doing anything at all? Feeling totally overwhelmed. I think sometimes this attitude can stem from an ego self that is not right-sized, from not recognizing that it's okay to do the things you can do, the things that are yours to do. Nadia Bolz-Weber has a discernment practice where she asks these 3 questions. What is mine to do and what is not mine to do? What is mine to say and what is not mine to say? What is mine to care about and what is not mine to care about? And while that third one might seem a little callous, it's also important to recognize our limitations and have a little bit of humility, knowing that there are other people who care about the same things that we care about that may actually be better equipped to do the kind of work that we're not capable of doing. And we can celebrate them and support them and be grateful for them and not be them. It's okay to be average, in other words. And in fact, often that recognition helps us be better co-creators for something new in the world. So now I'm going to invite you to join me in a little exercise of self-compassion. Are you willing? Okay. See if, as we go through this exercise, if you can identify the 3 elements that I talked about of self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. I want you to begin by thinking about a situation in your life that may be causing you stress. Maybe it's a health problem, relationship problem, or work problem. Choose something in the mild range. And once you have something in mind, visualize the situation. What's the setting look like? What's being said? What's happening? You might feel a little discomfort in your body, and that's okay. Let that arise as it needs to. And now let yourself recognize, acknowledge how that feels. And try expressing that feeling to yourself. This hurts. This feels painful. This is making my chest tight. And now try saying to yourself something like, this is part of life. Other people have experienced this. I'm not alone in this feeling. And then offer yourself a gesture of soothing touch, maybe a hand on your heart, maybe both hands on your heart, stroking your cheek, whatever feels soothing for you. And now try saying something soothing to yourself, something that a friend might say to you in this situation. And then finally ask yourself, what do I need right now? What can I give myself for my own comfort and support? And that's it. That's the practice. You can do this first thing in the morning. Some people like to do it right before they go to sleep at night, or make it a part of a regular meditation or prayer practice. If that felt weird to you, you are not alone, because this is not something our culture recognizes as valuable. It doesn't come naturally to us. But if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. It is without a solid foundation. There is no one more worthy of love and care than the one who is seated in your own body. Can I get an amen? Amen. Amen. No one is more worthy of love and care than the one seated in your own body. Amen. And blessed be.